I'm Dan Planiga, and this is...
And I'm Neil Krishan.
So as Pat mentioned, we're still working out on some of the adoption papers, but we're kind of new to the whole process here. So we're just going to talk a little bit about ourselves and where we're at, but we're really at the forefront of implementing AUD.
So we'll just start a little bit about Fortis, Alberta, and who we are. So we provide electricity to more than 500,000 residential, commercial, and industrial sites across central and southern Alberta. So you can kind of see our service territory there in the shaded area. So outside of the major cities of Edmonton and Calgary, that's kind of the majority of the... so geographically, it's quite a large service territory that we're responsible for.
Yeah, so size of Alberta is just slightly smaller than the state of Texas, so this has a reference point. So we have about 129,000 kilometers of overhead line. Like Neil mentioned, most of our stuff is overhead, rural areas, and some challenging geographical areas within the province there as well, with about 1.1 million power poles, and so that's about 60% of the grid that's within the province of Alberta.
And then, so we deliver approximately 17,000 gigawatt hours of electricity annually. And interesting fact of that, approximately 15% is now generated by renewable sources that are directly connected to our system. So we've been seeing an increase of that in the last few years, as I'm sure a lot of you guys are, and no sign of a slowdown there. So that with that comes the complexities of connection onto the system and everything else.
That's right. So we have a lot of sunshine in southern Alberta, probably number one in the country there, including wind as well. So we do have some unique areas. Southern Alberta will get winds up to 100 miles an hour in certain regions. So we do have different engineering aspects within the province because of those situations. We are a publicly traded company as well underneath the Fortis Inc. Umbrella. So we're part of 10 companies that encompass Fortis Inc., which include Eastern Canada, Newfoundland, where they're headquartered, Fortis BC, that has gas and electric. In BC, we have some stuff in the States, ITC, UNS in Arizona, Central Hudson, Caribbean Islands, Cayman, Belize as well. So we, as Fortis Inc. as well, have a lot of exposure to different areas within North America. So a little bit about why we started looking at a design tool and whether we should replace what we currently have. So I think Encore was mentioning about PowerPoint. I think what we have right now for a design tool on the drafting side anyways is very limited. So some of the software that we're currently using, and one of the big kickers of looking at a new design tool was looking at a new GIS system. So currently for the last 20 years or so, we've been using a product by Hexagon, which is Geoelectric, and it's no longer being supported, the version that we have. So we went out to the market with a consultant and are currently in the process of implementing a new GIS system. So we're going to go to Esri UN. That kicked off a whole bunch of other projects. Another thing, because we have a design tool that doesn't really have any smarts within it, there's always a lack of consistency. So me as a senior designer within the company, looking at people's designs, you would see different errors always continually. I'm not a doctor by any means, but I would diagnose people with FFS, which is fat finger syndrome, where, it's supposed to be a 2, but it's a 3. And that designer would have that same issue all the time, and I'd ask him if he took his pills that morning. Duplication of efforts as well. So all our prints are PDF created through our tool in Geoelectric, and several versions of PDF. So we would have an estimate print, we'd have a site check print for the survey company. We would have several of our different stamps. So we go through a 5-step check-in process. And then the actual construction print as well, and the as-built. those were all different files that we were using within there and duplicating or recreating all those files in one. Minimal integration within the tool. So our design tool doesn't talk to SAP or to our CU units. Everything gets redrafted within Geoelectric. So from a PDF, redrafted again, and then a bill of material created from there. And so a lot of that as well, very little integration. So one mantra that we have as well when we say customized is we were looking for something that's configurable, not customizable. So for example, our existing drafting tool doesn't have the color orange. When we asked about it, that was a IT solution of, 100,000 or more, right? That's all I had on my list. I just wanted orange. But now we're going to go to a solution that we have AutoCAD. So we have a whole suite of extra stuff that we have there as well. Material training documentation as well. We do have a lot of great documentation, but in regards to upkeeping everything. So I think with a lot of other utilities as well, different processes, different workflows, different departments, trying to keep up with all that and having people have that latest documentation there as well. You want me to talk about this one?
Or start off. So basically, we've got our GIS transformation program roadmap shown in the timeline there. So we're basically looking at where we're at today. Again, we're very early in the entire process in that, but we're kicking off the start here September 2024, where phase one begins. And so we have been working, like Dan mentioned, on that upgrade to our Esri utility network for the last, year or two, and in all the prep that goes into cutting over to that. And so that's in progress, but now bringing in the timeline for our AUD implementation and our systems upgrades and tie-ins is kind of outlined here.
So what I mentioned, it's kind of unique, I guess, from some other stories here where little communication from GIS. It was almost like GIS telling us, hey, you should update your design tool. So this whole umbrella of having Esri UN has kicked off these 10 different separate projects, with AUD being one of them. So we have a lot of work here and communication between these different departments to implement Esri UN and then all the other systems that use our GIS system. So I think when we first originally looked at our current GIS system and how we use it, we had probably 40 different types of programs working or relying on that GIS system. So lots of stuff going on in the background, lots of different departments within the company, but also knowing that we're all in it together currently right now, there's been a lot of communication back and forth for that. So when we looked at AUD, we did have a consultant that we looked at a couple different vendors for a new design tool. And really when we looked at AUD, there was certain things that we were questioning or asking about along with the consultant that we were using. So we were looking at our existing workflow. So are we able to do more stuff from the office rather than sending somebody out to the field, right? So when we look at doing an estimate, can I do an estimate that also can prove that the design can get built? Does it meet code? Do we have the material, everything on there, rather than sending out a quote that's not valid the day that it's signed? Another big thing for us was who else is using AUD, right? So who else was on there? So when we first had the list from SBS, we recognized some of our sister companies on that list, and some that were close neighbors to us. So we reached out to a bunch of those folks to get some of their input. So we did spend a lot of time investigating, getting some verbatim of how other utilities were using SBS's tool and how it was working with SBS. So one challenge that we recognized quite early on was we seem to be quite a bit different than a lot of other utilities in regards to the extent of our engineering. So we do a nonlinear analysis on all our poles, which is kind of a unique to the Canadian market or Canadian code. And so that was one thing. The amount of survey that we do, and the engineering structures that we do as well. So one utility that we reached out that we met with several times online because it was in Australia, Queensland, was a very, very good support for us because they seemed to mimic what our system was in regards to distances with low customer count and some of the engineering functions that they were doing there as well. So one thing that we did notice from a lot of the utilities that we did interview was not the functions that AUD can do and all the great things and how it's automated, but more on the relationship side. So one thing that we heard quite often was how good of a vendor SBS was. So some of the utilities, I think it was Queensland, that actually stated, I wish all the vendors that we worked with were like SBS because they were very good to work with. So that was one key aspect that we had that made that decision to go with AUD a lot easier. Just some other stuff about some cleanup of our existing systems, decommissioning them. We are currently looking at some other implementations along with GIS systems and AUD. So looking at a mobile platform and also looking at some new design or GPS tools. So we currently use Trimble units. They're quite old. I found one in our museum actually in Drumheller. So we have dinosaurs, lots of dinosaur bones in Alberta. They actually had one in a showcase. So that's what we're currently using. So it was time to update that as well. Yeah, and then just looking at AutoCAD licenses as we're still working on that, but we are planning to go ahead and implement AUD shortly here and get kicked off in about the next 2 weeks or so.
Yeah, so some of the differences that were first apparent to us when we were kind of evaluating in that and looking at that was we have a lot of in-house kind of proprietary design tools, as I'm sure a lot of you guys do as well as Excel spreadsheets and other things that we've gotten way down the line of using over the last couple decades and that. And they're extremely powerful for what they do, but then with those come with constant upkeep and maintenance of them, and we're having to actually make sure that they're running as needed. So some of the first impressions, and I'll let Dan maybe jump in here and talk about that, but we were looking for a lot more of or we were looking forward to something that's more off the shelf as opposed to us having to continually have to maintain it in-house and try to keep it running along with changes.
Right. So yeah, we did have some demos from SBS. I think Jim Lucas did a demo for us originally, and just showing the one-click design, right? So you can click one click, and it's drawing your pole. It's bringing in that material. That material can have CUs with cost. It's doing those analysis. Some of those calculations that were built right into the tool, so voltage drop, cable pull, things like that. Those were all things that were separate processes that we were doing currently in our current system. So we could draw a pole, but it was just the circle on a print, right? Where then we would have to go to this spreadsheet for a cable pull, go to this system to get cost or order that material, where this was all being done at once. So in regards to speeding up the process from the design side, that was impressive for us. Integration, like I said, we don't have right now, right? So integrating into, for example, SAP, where we'd keep our CUs. The flexibility, so customizable, and we did see that from the utilities that we talked to. Everybody uses it different, right? And they use it towards their scenario or their utility. That was important to us. We got the color orange in CAD. That was great. And just the ability, right? So right now we have a red line that doesn't snap to anything. To be honest, PowerPoint, I think, would be a more powerful tool than we have right now because it does have that function. Access to visual information. So even like our quote letters right now are just a white-based red print line that doesn't reference to anything visual. So you think of a customer and they're building a line and they're back 40 or whatever, right? They want to see, oh, okay, I can visually kind of see where this line is going to go, and it might be easy for them to accept a quote where we didn't have that visibility right now. And even using that further on to use a 3D representation of that. We did realize that would have to change a lot of our process. Some things that we had to investigate a little bit more that we were unclear about was bringing some of our survey data and what we bring in. And another thing that we mentioned before, being unique in the Canadian market, and I think we're similar maybe to Australia, was that nonlinear calculations. So trying to bring that in. So we did talk about plugins that AUD can bring in, for example, where we're looking at using SpiderCalc to do some of those calculations for us. I can talk about this one a little bit more as well. So this is kind of just a high level layout. So going through and looking at using AUD. With our team, really we're looking at the coordination between the different groups, who is it going to impact, and then creating that timeline for us. So we have done a fairly good job of kind of realizing maybe some of the hurdles or who's going to be impacted. And that's one thing that we focused on the last couple of years. We did have a big change in our company in regards to our linemen and PLT and how they operate. All their job descriptions changed to be more efficient within the company. And so a big thing that we have is change management. So who needs to be notified, get in front of it in regards to people that are worried about these changes, and keep people in the loop as well, right? And so I've been telling the folks in design as well is that I'm not expected to make this solution for you. This is our solution, right? And so keeping you guys in the loop, but these ideas will come from you guys as well, because ultimately it's going to be your tool. One thing with our phased approach that we were excited to do with SBS as well is that we were under the impression that financially and coding and everything else that we might have to do everything at once. So when we cut over to our new GIS system, Esri UN, that as well would be the same day that we'd start be using AUD, because our existing GIS system wouldn't be able to manage this process and stuff. But we are able to phase this out into different phases. And so what our hope is to start implementing a kind of a vanilla version of AUD and having it up and running by mid of next year, giving us some time to train our folks for about 6 months before we go to Esri UN. This then would go into phase 2, where we'd actually then implement Esri UN. So not having both of those changes happen to those designers at the same time. And then I'll have Neil just talk about phase 3.
Yeah, and so, I mean, phase 3 will result in what Dan was talking about earlier, where we have all these specific tools we in-house that, we've been maintaining in that. And so our nonlinear analysis requirements for Canadian code need us to somehow get that engineering calculation done. So we're exploring options. We have our own structure analysis DSA tool that we currently use. And so that logic is there, but we're looking at other options as possibly exporting out to have SpiderCalc do that calculation and then bringing that info back in and that. So that is kind of to be determined later. Like we are hoping to get up and running with the vanilla installation and then that gives us time in the background to perfect and get comfortable with what engineering calculations we need to get done and have those implemented in a way that makes sense and works for our designers to be able to utilize those tools as effectively as they're currently using the tools that allow us to get the stuff done. So
yeah, I just want to finish. We do have questions. This is more questions that we're actually looking for you guys. So we've had some great conversations already with a lot of you folks out there, and I've really enjoyed it. So, and some of these have already been answered from some of the presentations that we've had as well. So implementation strategy, right? I know some of you have talked about delays and having a dedicated group. That's really helped us even from last year, talking to a lot of you of trying to get those dedicated resources, knowing that trying to do something on the side of your plate doesn't really work. And that coincides with timelines. Really curious on the UDH side of things, the data integrations, right? So I know some of you have talked about using some of your other systems like SAP, some are using Maximo and bringing some other information in. So if you do have some unique situations or things that you've bringing into AUD that are kind of like super cool or neat or are really helpful within your business, I'd love to chat with you. Change transformation and onboarding has been great too. Talking about some of you folks about how you've helped out your employees with having SharePoint sites and remedy tickets and continued onboarding along with training. One thing that we're currently trying to figure out on the architecture side is where we want to go. And that session yesterday was really great in regards to dealing with contractors, but just looking in regards to as well of does it make sense to have the software on a local machine or a Citrix version? What's the benefits and things that don't work maybe by implementing one versus the other as well there. So, and if you want to talk about engineering.
Yeah. So basically, yeah, like as Dan mentioned, the Citrix environment, we do have some. Right now, we're running into some issues where having large GPUs available in the Citrix environment for that isn't necessarily what we currently have set up in our virtual machines. So those processing speed requirements and that are really lagging and or having some issues with. So it may just be, something where we're getting basic processing virtual machines, but we need something that's, a little bit more powerful. So I know we've talked to a few of you guys about that. We're curious to know if other utilities were having problems with their Citrix environments being maybe not as powerful as they need to be for that. And then I had mentioned this as well in implementing our engineering calculations into the tool, and the best way to do that is something that we still got to finalize and determine. So, I'm looking forward to having some conversations with some of the other utilities, and we have already as well into what solutions and things worked for specific needs of the other utilities and that. So.
Just sort of a comment around, maybe this ties into the implementation strategy. You'd mentioned that you wanted to harvest ideas from the users, which I agree, and we did the same thing. So just feedback on that. Have a plan for how you intake that feedback, those suggestions, and how do you prioritize them so that you are matching in your development cycle, that you're matching your requirements that you need to do along with the really great ideas that your users are going to produce, right? I think it's important to have that user feedback if you can, if your business allows it, because it helps build engagement and it helps keep the users feel like they're part of that solution, right? But from my perspective, it was overwhelming. I guess I didn't anticipate the amount of feedback and really good ideas that came from our user base. And it was almost overwhelming to the point where I couldn't fold all of those great ideas in. I still have a list of probably 200 great ideas that we'll get to at some point, but it's a prioritization exercise, right? So
Right.
I think it's great that you're considering that and that you're doing it, but just some feedback from my own perspective and how we had to handle it on our side.
Right. Excellent. Thank you.